For 3 decades, Johnny Carson sat behind that famous desk, calm, charming, and quietly sharper than anyone who ever took his stage. To millions, he was the king of late night. But to Hollywood insiders, he was something else entirely. A human lie detector with perfect comedic timing. Carson didn't need lie detectors, confrontations, or gotcha journalism. He had something far more powerful. Silence. A raised eyebrow. A half smile that said, "Are you sure about that?" And somehow that one look could make a Hollywood legend unravel right in front of America. From 1962 to 1992, over 20,000 stars sat across from him. Actors, musicians, politicians, comedians. Each one walked on stage thinking they could charm Johnny Carson. Most did, but a few got caught in their own stories. And when that happened, The Tonight Show didn't just become entertainment. It became a quiet masterclass in truth and illusion. Carson had a gift. He could make people feel safe enough to speak freely. Then watch as they revealed a little too much. Sometimes it was harmless. A small lie about age, a bit of Hollywood ego. Other times it got tense. The room would change. You could see the audience shift in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. And Johnny? He never flinched. He'd just keep smiling, letting the truth hang there in the air like cigarette smoke under studio lights. Behind that Midwestern politeness, there was a razor-sharp instinct. A former Tonight Show producer once said Carson could smell dishonesty before a guest even sat down. If a story didn't sound right, he'd test it, gently, cleverly, with one well-timed question. And that's when the real magic happened. No shouting, no insults. Just the slow, delicious moment when the audience realized the guest had just exposed themselves. What made Johnny so special wasn't just how he caught people lying. It was how he let them save face while still giving his viewers the truth. He didn't humiliate. He just revealed. Tonight, we're diving back into the golden glow of late-night television. The laughter, the charm, and the quiet little explosions of truth that happened when Hollywood's biggest stars tried to outsmart Johnny Carson. These are the 5 unforgettable moments when fame, ego, and reality collided under those bright NBC lights. And Johnny, with that knowing smile, turned every lie into legendary television. It started as a simple chat. One of those easygoing Tonight Show moments where Johnny Carson leaned back in his chair, smiling, letting a movie star reminisce about the old days. Tony Curtis, by then a Hollywood veteran, was as smooth as ever. He had that perfect hair, that movie star confidence, and a grin that made him look decades younger than his actual age. And that was the problem. Curtis had built a career on charm and good looks. The slick heartthrob from Some Like It Hot Spartacus, the defiant ones. But by the late 1970s, he wasn't the dashing young rebel anymore. Hollywood had moved on, and Tony was desperate to hold on to that golden illusion, even if it meant shaving a few years off the truth. That night, he was telling a story about his days in the Navy during World War II. It was funny, casual, nostalgic. The audience was eating it up. Until Carson leaned in just slightly and asked, "So how old were you when that happened?" The question sounded innocent, but the math didn't. Curtis answered without thinking, tossing out an age that would have made him barely a teenager during wartime service. There was a brief pause, the kind that only Johnny Carson could make feel eternal. You could almost see him doing the math in his head, the little half smile curling on his face. Then, with perfect timing, Johnny asked again, "Wait, how old were you again?" The audience caught it instantly. That gentle wave of laughter spread across the studio. Not cruel, but knowing. Curtis froze, realizing the numbers didn't add up. He tried to backtrack, stammering something about being around that age. But it was too late. The truth had already landed. Carson didn't call him out. He didn't need to. He just gave that famous raised eyebrow. The look that said, "I'm not buying it, Tony." And the laughter grew louder, wrapping the moment in pure late-night gold. After the show, a few of the crew recalled Johnny chuckling about it backstage. He wasn't mean-spirited. He just found it funny that someone like Tony Curtis, a Hollywood legend, still felt the need to pretend time hadn't touched him. Johnny even joked, if Tony keeps talking about the war, he's going to make himself 12. That was the brilliance of Carson. He didn't embarrass people. He let the truth do that for him. And when he smiled, you knew he'd just caught another Hollywood illusion fading in real time. For Tony Curtis, it was a harmless fib. But for Johnny Carson, it was proof that even the most glamorous stars couldn't fool a man who'd spent 30 years watching people reveal who they really were. If Tony Curtis lied about his age, Zsa Gabor lied about everything else. By the 1970s, Zsa wasn't just an actress, she was an event. Her name alone brought a certain sparkle to the Tonight Show lineup. Feathers, diamonds, perfume. She'd glide onto that stage like European royalty, and that's exactly how she introduced herself to America, the Hungarian princess of Hollywood. The problem? There was no throne, no crown, no royal lineage, just a great accent, a sharper wit, and an incredible ability to sell fantasy as fact. Every time she appeared on Carson's show, she'd sprinkle in another detail about her noble bloodline. One night she bragged about her family estate in Budapest. The next she'd mention royal dinners she attended as a child. She was Hollywood's first influencer, famous for being famous, decades before that even became a thing. Johnny, of course, had heard these claims before. He liked Zsa. Her energy, her confidence, the way she made chaos look glamorous. But he also had that radar for when a guest's story got just a little too polished. So one night, as she sat on the couch in her sparkling gown, going on about her royal family, Carson smiled and asked, "Is that a real title? Or just the Hollywood kind?" The audience erupted. That one line hit harder than any confrontation ever could. It was perfectly Carson, polite, playful, and devastatingly sharp. Zsa froze for half a second, then gave a dramatic wave of her hand. "Oh, darling, you Americans, you don't understand European nobility," she purred, dodging the question like a pro. Johnny didn't press it. He didn't have to. That knowing half smile told everyone exactly what he was thinking. The studio was roaring. Even Zsa couldn't help but laugh. She'd been caught, and she knew it. Backstage, crew members said Johnny rolled his eyes whenever she brought up her royalty. He once joked to his writers, "If she's a princess, then I'm the king of Nebraska." It became an inside joke on the show. Zsa's royal stories were less about truth and more about theater. But that was what made the moment iconic. Carson didn't humiliate her. He gave her the space to keep her act alive while gently reminding everyone it was an act. That balance, truth with grace, was something no other late-night host ever mastered, quite like Johnny. Over time, it became a recurring dance. She'd lean into her fantasy, and he'd subtly remind her that the fantasy was half the fun. It wasn't mean, it was mutual. Zsa needed the illusion. Johnny needed the truth. Together, they gave audiences both. And that was the genius of Carson's Tonight Show. It wasn't just laughter and guests. It was a weekly mirror held up to Hollywood, showing just how far stars would go to keep their fairy tales alive. Now, when it came to power on The Tonight Show, there was only one guest who ever made Johnny Carson tread lightly: Frank Sinatra. Old Blue Eyes wasn't just a singer, he was a force of nature, smooth, magnetic, and dangerous in all the ways a man could be dangerous in mid-century Hollywood. People didn't just admire Sinatra, they feared him a little, and not without reason. By the time he appeared on Carson's show, rumors about Sinatra's alleged connections were practically legend. Whispers about mob ties, favors owed, friends in very dark places. But those stories were always kept behind closed doors. No one dared bring them up. At least not directly. No one, except Johnny Carson. It happened on a night when Carson was in rare form. Confident, unflappable, and just mischievous enough to test the limits. The interview started casually. Jokes, drinks, stories about Vegas. Sinatra was relaxed, charming. He thought he was in control. Then Carson leaned forward and asked, gently, almost playfully, "You've had quite the colorful group of friends over the years, haven't you, Frank?" The studio went silent. Even Ed McMahon's smile faded a little. Sinatra's eyes narrowed, that cold, blue, don't push me look that made entire rooms shrink. He gave a tight smile. You mean entertainers, right, Johnny? Johnny just nodded. Sure, entertainers. And the ones who handle the entertainers? The crowd laughed nervously. Sinatra didn't. He took a slow sip of his drink and changed the subject. Carson, knowing he'd hit the line, backed off. But that flicker in his eyes said he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Behind the scenes, producers were frozen. One later said, "It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the studio." Everyone knew Carson had just brushed up against one of Hollywood's most guarded secrets and lived to tell the joke. After the show, crew members swore they saw Sinatra leave the set without saying goodbye, his entourage close behind. And from that night forward, he never appeared on The Tonight Show again. To the audience at home, it was just an awkward exchange. To those who knew how this business worked, it was pure Carson bravery. A moment when America's friendliest interviewer dared to poke the bear. Carson didn't expose Sinatra with words. He exposed him with silence. That heavy, loaded pause where the truth hung between them, too dangerous to touch, and somehow that made it even louder. Decades later, that moment still stands as one of Carson's greatest tightrope walks. He never accused, never confirmed, but in one simple question, he reminded everyone watching that even the untouchable had something to hide. After Sinatra's icy stare, the air on The Tonight Show was never quite the same. But a few years later, Johnny faced a different kind of lie. Not one born from arrogance or danger, but from heartbreak. Elizabeth Taylor was, at that time, more than a movie star. She was Hollywood royalty. Those violet eyes had ruled the silver screen for decades. Through Cleopatra, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But fame had taken its toll. The public had watched her whirlwind marriages, her near-fatal illnesses, her public breakdowns. And when she finally returned to the spotlight, everyone, including Carson, knew the weight she was carrying. When Liz sat down across from Johnny, she looked radiant. Flawless makeup, bright smile, that unmistakable presence that only Elizabeth Taylor could have. The crowd adored her. But Johnny noticed something deeper. She moved slower than before. Her hands trembled ever so slightly when she reached for her glass, and her laughter, though beautiful, sounded rehearsed, like it had been practiced in the mirror. At one point, Johnny leaned in gently and asked, "You've been through quite a lot, Liz. How are you really feeling these days?" She smiled, that classic camera-perfect smile, and said the words everyone wanted to hear. "Oh, Johnny, I'm completely recovered." The audience applauded. It was a comforting moment, almost triumphant. But Johnny didn't clap. He just watched her, eyes soft, smile faint, almost as if he knew that wasn't the full truth. For a second, you could see the real Elizabeth Taylor. Not the icon, not the goddess, but the human being underneath. The one who'd been through surgeries, addiction, grief, and the crushing weight of being everyone's fantasy. Carson didn't push. He didn't expose her. He just nodded and said quietly, "Well, we're glad to have you back." It was simple, kind, but loaded with meaning. After the show, one of the producers said Johnny sat in silence for a few moments in his dressing room. He wasn't laughing or joking, just thoughtful. He told them, "Sometimes the lies people tell aren't to fool us. They're to protect themselves." It was one of those rare Carson moments where empathy outweighed entertainment. He could have made a joke, asked another question, tried to pull the mask away, but he didn't, because he understood that sometimes a lie isn't about deception, it's about survival. Elizabeth Taylor's "I'm fine" wasn't a scandal, it was a shield. And Johnny, in his quiet wisdom, let her keep it. That night, The Tonight Show wasn't about laughs or gossip, it was about grace. And in a town that thrives on illusion, Johnny Carson reminded everyone watching that even the strongest stars sometimes lie just to hold themselves together. By the late 1970s, The Tonight Show was running like clockwork. Cameras ready, audience primed, Carson flawless as ever. But behind those smooth live broadcasts, chaos could break out in seconds. And one of those moments came courtesy of a rock and roll legend named Chuck Berry. Chuck wasn't just a guest. He was history. The man who invented the sound every modern musician borrowed from. Charismatic, unpredictable, and notoriously temperamental. The kind of star who didn't wait for anyone. That night, Carson's show was packed. Every segment ran just a little longer than planned. By the time Chuck's musical performance was supposed to start, they were nearly out of time. A production assistant rushed backstage to let him know there'd be a short delay. Barry looked up, smiled, and said warmly, "Sure, no problem. I'm happy to wait." The assistant exhaled with relief. Disaster averted. Except that smile was a lie. As Carson continued the next segment, a quiet panic started rippling through the crew. Where was Chuck? No one could find him. Someone checked the green room. Empty. Checked backstage. Gone. The man who just said, "I'm happy to wait," had walked right out of NBC studios without saying a word. Just disappeared into the night. On air, Johnny kept the show rolling like nothing happened. He joked, told a story, pivoted seamlessly. Pure professionalism. But backstage, and it was chaos. Producers were scrambling for a replacement. The segment had to be filled with an old clip from a previous episode just to keep the timing right. When Carson found out, he didn't explode. He didn't even raise his voice. He just smiled, that quiet, dangerous Johnny Carson smile, the one everyone on staff knew meant, "I'll remember this." Later that night, he joked to the crew, "Next time someone says they're happy to wait, ask if it's a Chuck Berry happy or a real one." The phrase stuck. For years afterward, whenever a guest claimed to be fine with the delay, producers would exchange looks and whisper, "Careful, that's a Chuck Berry, okay?" It became an inside joke, but also a lesson. Because to Johnny Carson, honesty wasn't just a moral thing. It was professionalism. You could be difficult, demanding, even eccentric. He'd handled them all. But don't lie. Not to the man who built a career on reading people like an open book. The Berry incident became one of those stories that floated around the NBC halls for decades. Not because of what he said, but because of how Carson handled it. No confrontation, no drama, just calm, control, and a memory that lasted longer than any apology ever could. And that was the Johnny Carson way. He didn't need to call anyone out. He let time and truth do that for him. When you look back at those old Tonight Show tapes, the laughter, the applause, the bright studio lights, it all feels so effortless. But underneath that charm, there was something far deeper at play. Johnny Carson didn't just host celebrities, he studied them. He understood fame like few ever could. How it lifted people up, and how it slowly stripped them down. And maybe that's why he was so good at spotting a lie. He'd seen it all. The age fibs, the fake titles, the denials, the I'm fines. Hollywood was built on illusion, and Johnny knew it. But unlike most, he didn't try to destroy the illusion. He simply revealed it, gently, with that wry smile and Midwestern calm that said, "It's okay." You don't have to pretend to Carson. Every lie told on his couch was a window into something human. Vanity, fear, pride, insecurity. He saw them all as part of the same game. And maybe that's what made him such a legend. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't looking for a headline. He was looking for truth, and he always seemed to find it, even when his guests didn't mean to give it. Tony Curtis's math mistake, Zazia's fake crown, Sinatra's silence, Elizabeth's brave little "I'm fine," and Chuck Berry's vanishing act. Each one, in its own way, was a reminder that fame doesn't make you flawless. It just makes your lies a little louder. But Carson never punished people for their pretenses. He made them relatable. He showed America that even the biggest stars, the ones we put on pedestals, were just people trying to hold on to something. Youth, image, dignity, control. And that's why, decades later, Johnny Carson still feels timeless. Because behind every laugh, every pause, every perfectly timed question, he reminded us that truth always finds a way to shine through. The curtain closes, the lights fade, the applause fades out, but that smirk, that quiet look that said, "I know," that's the moment everyone remembers. Because in the golden age of Hollywood, surrounded by actors, singers, and legends, Johnny Carson might have been the only one who never had to fake a thing.